Do you remember the Guns of Navarone, 1961? It was once a defining symbol of 1960s war cinema. But today, not a single member of its cast is still alive. And even more unsettling, most of them died under chilling, heartbreaking circumstances. Accidents, addiction, cascading strokes, and deaths that went unnoticed for years. Join us as we uncover each of their stories and honor the legacy they left behind David Niven as Corporal John Anthony Miller. Corporal John Anthony Miller, the reluctant explosives expert of the Guns of Navarone, was portrayed by David Niven. At 51 years old, Niven brought the life of a weary yet razor-sharp British corporal onto the screen, turning quiet fear into quiet courage. He delivered a performance marked by restraint and vulnerability in the movie. Yet behind his elegant smile, Niven's real life was shaped by wounds he rarely allowed the public to see. Born on March 1, 1910, in London, he grew up surrounded by privilege, but scarred by loss. His father killed in WWI, his childhood fractured by cold boarding schools and the cruelty of a stepfather he secretly believed was his biological father. Those fractures deepened when his first wife, Primi Rollo, died at just 28 after falling down a staircase at a party. Her death broke him in a way no war ever could, leaving a shadow that followed him into films like A Matter of Life and Death and Around the World. In 80 Days, his second marriage to Hjördis Genberg seemed glamorous from afar, but behind closed doors it was a hollow union, cold, distant, and defined by emotional detachment. Hjördis battled depression and insecurity, while Niven drowned his loneliness in frantic socializing, unable to sit with his own grief. By the late 1970s, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, began to steal everything from him. First his balance, then his voice, and finally his independence. David Niven died on July 29, 1983, at age 73, in his chalet in Chateau d'Eck, Switzerland, refusing hospitalization so he could spend his final days with dignity. He was buried quietly in the village cemetery on August 2nd, surrounded by alpine silence. His estate, valued at $5 million including his Swiss villa, paintings, and luxury watches, was left to his children Anthony Quinn as Colonel Andrea Stavros. Colonel Andrea Stavros, the fierce and wounded Greek resistance fighter of the Guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Anthony Quinn. At 46 years old, Quinn brought the life of a man carved from grief and fire, channeling a volcanic energy that made Stavros unforgettable. In 1961, his raw physicality and unpredictable soul electrified the story, standing in perfect and volatile contrast to Gregory Peck's calm resolve. Yet Quinn's own life was even more restless than the roles he played. Born on April 21, 1915, in Chihuahua, Mexico, he grew up poor, displaced, and always on the outside looking in. That ache for belonging followed him into adulthood. His marriage to Catherine DeMille, already haunted by the drowning of their young son Christopher, fractured under his infidelity and rising fame. Success in Viva Zapata. And lustful only wid his second marriage to Italian designer Jolanda Adalori began as a refuge but soon spiraled into a maze of betrayals. Quinn fathered children with multiple women during this marriage, leaving behind emotional wreckage and guilt. He rarely admitted publicly. These wounds surfaced in roles like Zorba, where Joe Anthony Quinn died on June 3, 2001, at age 86, from respiratory failure following complications of lung cancer treatment. He was laid to rest beneath a maple tree in the backyard of his Rhode Island home. His net worth was estimated $20 million, became the center of bitter feuds among his many children, Gregory Peck as Captain Keith Mallory. Captain Keith Mallory, the quiet strategist who anchored the Guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Gregory Peck. At 45 years old, Peck brought the life of a calm, sharp-minded mountaineer to the screen, embodying a man who carried impossible missions on his shoulders with unwavering dignity. In 1961, His presence became the moral center of the film. But the man behind that strength was shaped by a fragile foundation. Born on April 5, 1916 in San Diego, Peck grew up drifting between separated parents, grandparents, and strict Catholic schools. That childhood instability followed him into adulthood, especially in his first marriage to Greta Kukkonen. 17 years together slowly unraveled under the weight of emotional distance and his affair with Ingrid Bergman. Even as his career soared with Roman Holiday and later To Kill a Mockingbird, he often confessed that the heroic image projected onto him felt like a burden he wasn't always strong enough to carry. His second marriage to Veronique Pisani was steadier, yet life dealt him a wound that never healed, the suicide of his eldest son, Jonathan. That loss hollowed something inside him, forcing him into quiet corners of reflection and long years of philanthropic work, as if charity could soften the guilt. His health began to fail in the late 1990s as chronic lung disease tightened around his breathing, but he kept traveling, speaking, and meeting audiences. Gregory Peck passed away peacefully in his sleep on June 12, 2003, at age 87, taken by bronchopneumonia. He was entombed at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in Los Angeles. His estate, valued around $40 million, including his Los Angeles home, film memorabilia, and vintage cars, was left to his family and charitable causes, Anthony Quayle as Major Roy Franklin. Major Roy Franklin, the wounded officer whose failure becomes a turning point in The Guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Anthony Quayle. At 48 years old, Quayle brought the life of a proud, disciplined British major to the screen, his performance marked by quiet anguish, military precision, and the haunted eyes of a man carrying more than a broken leg. Away from the screen, Quayle's life was shaped by conflicts far more internal than any battlefield. Born on September 7, 1913 in Ainsdale, England, he grew up in a strict household and entered adulthood during a century scarred by war. His marriages reflected that inner restlessness. His first with Hermione Hannon dissolved quickly, but his second marriage to Dorothy Hyson, though long-lasting, was marked by emotional distance. While the world saw stability, the truth was quieter and lonelier. He lived for the stage, often leaving his wife and children behind as he chased roles, direction jobs, and the demanding life of a Shakespearean actor. That devotion strained his family, and the guilt followed him into his later performances, especially in Anne of the Thousand Days and Lawrence of Arabia. His wartime service with the Special Operations Executive left deeper marks. Tasked with liaison missions in Albania, he witnessed violence and betrayal that never fully left his mind. Those memories made him allergic to Hollywood's artificiality. He longed for the truth of theater, even as film success pulled him back into the spotlight. By the mid-1980s, liver cancer began its quiet destruction, and Quayle withdrew from public life, devoting his remaining strength to smaller theater tours, teaching, and private reflection. Anthony Quayle died at his home in Chelsea on October 20, 1989, at age 76, surrounded by family. He was laid to rest in London, far from the deserts of Lawrence of Arabia and the cliffs of Navarone, in the city whose stages had shaped him. His net worth, about $2 million, including his London home and modest investments, reflected a life lived not for wealth, but for craft. James Darren as Spyros Papademos. Spyros Papademos, the spirited young Greek saboteur of the Guns of Navarone, was portrayed by James Darren. At just 25 years old, Darren brought the life of a brave but vulnerable commando to the screen, adding warmth and youthful intensity to the 1961 epic. His performance glowed with the eagerness of a rising star still discovering the weight of war stories he helped tell. Yet the real James Darren, born James William Ercolani on June 8, 1936 in Philadelphia, carried a far more complicated path to fame. He grew up in a tight, working-class Italian-American neighborhood. That fire pushed him to New York to study under the legendary Stella Adler, But at the same time, it pushed him into a personal life marked by turbulence. His first marriage to Gloria Terlitsky fractured under religious tension and family disapproval, ending quickly and painfully. Losing daily contact with his son after the divorce left wounds that followed him for decades, even as his face graced billboards and magazine covers. His second marriage to Evie Norland offered stability, but not without its shadows. Darren's grueling schedule, endless studio sessions, touring, filming The Time Tunnel, and later Star Trek Deep Space Nine, pulled him away from home more than he wanted to admit. For years, he fought to redefine himself, directing television and taking deeper roles, but the exhaustion of constant reinvention weighed on him. In his final years, worsening heart complications slowed him, then silenced him. James Darren died peacefully in his sleep on September 2, 2024, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at age 88 after battling aortic valve failure. His estate, valued at roughly $5 million, including his Los Angeles home and a cherished collection of vintage guitars, was left to his children Gia Scala as Anna. Anna, the mysterious and tragic resistance fighter of the guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Gia Scala. At 27 years old, Scala brought the life of a fragile yet determined heroine to the screen, her beauty and sadness lingering like a shadow across the 1961 epic. Behind those piercing eyes, audiences sensed both strength and something far more delicate. Born Josephine Grace Johanna Scoglio on March 3, 1934 in Liverpool, she grew up between the strict traditions of Sicily and the cold uncertainties of England. When she moved to New York at 16, loneliness settled into her life. Her early success, roles in Tip on a Dead Jockey and The Angry Hills, couldn't hide the truth. Hollywood saw only her face, not her depth. Her marriage to actor Don Burnett, once full of hope, collapsed under constant separations and her growing dependence on alcohol. They had no children, and when the marriage ended, the silence in her home became unbearable. After her mother's death in 1957, Scala's inner world fractured. Depression tightened around her like a vice. Directors still praised her beauty, but beauty had become a burden she no longer wanted to carry. By 1970, her career had nearly vanished, replaced by a haze of barbiturates, grief, and the feeling that Hollywood had forgotten her entirely. Gia Scala died alone in her Hollywood Hills home on April 30, 1972, at only 38, her body discovered after an overdose of alcohol and barbiturates. The coroner ruled it accidental, but those who loved her knew it was heartbreak that had killed her long before the chemicals did. She was laid to rest at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. Her remaining estate, valued at around $200,000, much of it consumed by debts, was donated to mental health charities. Stanley Baker as CPO Butcher Brown. CPO Butcher Brown, the hardened commando whose stoic resolve shaped the guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Stanley Baker. At 33 years old, Baker brought the life of a tough, battle-scarred sailor to the screen, grounding the 1961 film with grit and quiet fury. His presence radiated authenticity. Baker was born William Stanley Baker on February 28, 1928, in the coal mining town of Ferndale, Wales, where survival was a daily battle and dreams rarely escaped the valley raised by a father who lost a leg in a mining accident. Baker grew up believing his future would be the same, digging coal, boxing on the side, and hoping for small mercies. Acting found him by accident, but the violence of his upbringing never left him. His marriage to Ellen Martin, though loving, was strained by his relentless ambition, constant travel, and growing obsession with film production. Long nights away from home and a restless spirit pushed cracks through their marriage, leaving Baker torn between his family and the empire he was building. As his career soared with films like Helldrivers and Zulu, the pressure to succeed shadowed him. He drank heavily, gambled compulsively, and threw himself into risky business deals that drained both his finances and his peace of mind. The cigarette habit he picked up in his teens turned into a lifelong addiction, carving into his health year after year. By the mid-1970s, lung cancer began to spread aggressively, and suddenly the man once known for volcanic intensity could barely catch his breath. He kept working, kept producing, kept fighting, because stopping felt too much like surrender. Stanley Baker died on June 28, 1976, in Malaga, Spain, at just 48 years old, taken by pneumonia after cancer ravaged his lungs and bones. He was cremated at Putney Vale Crematorium, his ashes scattered on a hillside overlooking the Welsh Valley. His estate, valued at about $1 million, including his Wales property and stakes in film ventures, was later entangled in legal disputes, a final echo of the chaos he battled throughout his career. Richard Harris, as Squadron Leader Barnsby. Squadron Leader Barnsby, the blunt and fearless airman who tries to bomb the impossible in the guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Richard Harris. At 31 years old, Harris brought the life of a rebellious, sharp-tongued pilot to the screen, his presence crackling with the raw electricity that would later define his legendary career. But Harris's story began far from Hollywood glamour. Born on October 1, 1930, in Limerick, Ireland, he was raised in a strict Catholic household bursting with 8 children and impossible expectations. Tuberculosis nearly stole his life as a teenager. Recovery left him weak in body, but fiercely independent in spirit. His marriage to Elizabeth Reese Williams seemed golden from the outside, but Harris's drinking, temper, and ambition tore at its seams. 3 sons were caught in the storm of his rising fame and self-destruction. His second marriage to actress Ann Turkle brought passion but even more volatility. Harris loved deeply but lived chaotically until both marriages collapsed. As his filmography grew, This Sporting Life, A Man Called Horse, Camelot, Unforgiven, Gladiator, so did his reputation as a hellraiser. He drank through premieres, fought with directors, spent fortunes on whims, and woke many mornings unsure how he'd made it home. Fame filled his pockets, but alcoholism emptied his soul. By the late 1970s, he nearly died from drugs, and only then did he begin clawing his way back to sobriety. His final reinvention came in his 70s when he embraced the role of Albus Dumbledore, a gentle mentor so radically different from the man he once was. Richard Harris died on October 25, 2002, at age 72, after a brief battle with Hodgkin's lymphoma. He spent his final days in a London hospital, drifting in and out of a coma. His ashes were scattered in the Bahamas, near his cherished island home. His estate, estimated at $20 million, including beachfront property, valuable art, and vintage cars, was divided among his children, with a significant portion donated to cancer research organizations. Brian Forbes as Cone. Cone, the cynical but sharp-edged explosives expert of the guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Brian Forbes. At about 35 years old, Forbes brought the life of a weary technician to the screen, giving the film a quiet intelligence that complemented its heroics. Even in a supporting role, his eyes hinted at a man who thought faster than everyone else, and carried more weight than he let on. Born John Theobald Clark on July 22, 1926, in London's East End, Forbes grew up during the war years, shaped by evacuations, shortages, and an early awareness that comfort was fragile. Acting brought him escape, but writing brought him identity. Still, the more successful he became, the more his personal life strained. His first marriage ended abruptly as fame pulled him away from home. Even after marrying actress Nanette Newman, his lifelong partner, work consumed him. He moved from acting to screenwriting to directing, launching himself into Whistle Down the Wind, Seance on a Wet Afternoon, and eventually The Stepford Wives. But his workaholic nature kept him distant from his daughters, leaving emotional gaps he often tried to fill with new projects rather than presence. As he climbed higher in the British film industry, even running EMI films for a time, pressure shadowed every success. He carried the weight of an industry on his back, and the strain carved deeply into him, misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis in the mid-1970s. He lived for years believing his body was slowly betraying him. The fear of decline pushed him into an even harsher work cycle, writing novels, directing films, managing studios, until exhaustion became a constant companion. Brian Forbes died at his home in Virginia Water on May 8, 2013, at age 86, surrounded by his family. His estate, valued at around $5 million, including his Surrey home, rare books, and classic cars, reflected a lifetime of collecting, creating, and rebuilding James Robertson Justice as Jensen. Jensen, the stern and commanding intelligence officer of the guns of Navarone, was portrayed by James Robertson Justice. At 54 years old, Justice brought the life of a towering, thunder-voiced authority figure to the 1961 epic, grounding the film. His performance carried a rare gravity, the kind that comes from a soul already weathered by storms. Born James Norval Harold Justice on June 15, 1907, in southeast London, he reinvented himself countless times before Hollywood ever knew his name. He drifted across continents, logging in Canada, teaching in New York, mining for gold, even keeping the peace for the League of Nations. But all that wandering could not protect him from the grief that would define his private life. His marriage to Dilys Hayden cracked slowly and painfully under the weight of tragedy when their only son drowned at just 4 years old. That loss hollowed him, driving him into long silences and a lifelong fear of emotional closeness. By the time he married actress Irene von Meyendorff, he was already a man living behind emotional walls. His booming voice and aristocratic humor made him beloved on-screen, especially in the Doctor in the House films, but off-screen, he spent money as fast as he earned it. Racing cars, collecting rare books, restoring Highland homes, living beyond any budget. When a massive stroke struck him in 1968, the financial chaos he had tried to outrun finally caught him. Multiple strokes followed, leaving him unable to act, unable to speak clearly, and finally bankrupt. James Robertson. Justice died on July 2, 1975, at age 68, after another devastating stroke. He had married Irene only 3 days earlier, perhaps a final attempt to anchor a life slipping away. His ashes were scattered across a lonely moor in northern Scotland, close to the Highland village he once called home. His remaining estate, valued at around $500,000, mostly from the sale of rare books and vintage cars to pay medical debts, was a faint echo of the grand life he had lived George Mikell as Sessler. Sessler, the cold and calculating SS officer of the guns of Navarone, was portrayed by George Mikell. At 32 years old, Mikell brought the life of a controlled, steel-eyed antagonist to the 1961 film, using his sharp features and tense stillness to create a villain audiences immediately feared. It was a performance that defined how Hollywood saw him for decades. Born Jurgis Mikelaitis on April 4, 1929, in Bildenii, Lithuania, Mikell's childhood fractured early when he was taken to Germany at age 12. Forced displacement, a foreign language, and the constant pressure to adapt shaped a man who struggled with connection all his life. His first marriage, to Australian woman Helen Stafford, fell apart after years of long separations and his growing frustration with typecast roles. His second marriage, to English partner Mary Ann Glenn, brought companionship but also emotional distance, partly because they were unable to have children. The silence inside his home often echoed the quiet loneliness he carried since childhood. Professionally, Mikell became trapped in his own success. After Navarone and especially The Great Escape, 1963, Hollywood repeatedly cast him as the Nazi officer, the uniform, the accent, the same cold stare. It brought steady income, but slowly drained his passion. In later years, he turned to writing, publishing short stories, 2 screenplays, and a travel essay reflecting on his journey to Pakistan. George Mikell died in London on May 12, 2020, at age 91 from natural causes. His estate, valued at around $1 million, including his modest London home and small investments, was left to close friends and literary causes Walter Gotell as Mikell. Mikell, the stern and calculating German officer in The Guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Walter Gotell. At 37 years old, Gotell brought the life of a cold, restrained presence to the 1961 classic, using his sharp gaze and quiet authority to turn even brief scenes into unforgettable moments. Born Walter Jacques Gotell on March 15, 1924, in Bonn, his early life was marked by fear and displacement. Growing up in Berlin as anti-Semitism rose around him, he watched his family lose their sense of home long before they fled Nazi Germany for England in 1938. That fracture, leaving everything behind at age 14, created a lifelong tension between the safety he found in Britain and the wounds he carried from the past. His first marriage to actress Yvonne Hills brought moments of stability, but the demands of constant travel and his growing schedule strained their bond. When Yvonne died in 1974, something in him collapsed. The grief followed him like a shadow long after he remarried. As his career accelerated, Gotell became trapped by the uniform Hollywood wanted him to wear. His bilingual fluency and European features typecast him as soldiers, officers, and villains, roles in The African Queen, Lord Jim, and later The Great Escape. He accepted them, even embraced them, but each performance carried echoes of a past he never chose. Only when he portrayed General Gogol in the James Bond series did he feel a shift. Yet even then, the personal cost remained. The industry's demands, combined with the emotional distance created by years of playing hardened men, complicated both his second marriage and his relationship with his daughter, Walter Gotell, died of cancer on May 5, 1997, at the age of 73. His estate, valued at around $1 million, reduced by medical costs and divided between his family and the Irish farm he loved, reflected a life spent building more than he ever spoke about Alan Cuthbertson as Major Baker. Major Baker, the rigid and impeccably strict officer of the Guns of Navarone, was portrayed by Alan Cuthbertson. At 41 years old, he brought the life of a disciplined, sharp-mannered military figure to the 1961 film, commanding every scene with calm authority and clipped precision. Even in brief appearances, he left an impression that lasted. Born on April 7, 1920 in Perth, Western Australia, Cuthbertson grew up craving structure, something he found first on stage, then during World War II as a Royal Australian Air Force flight lieutenant. That discipline, however, came with emotional cost. His first marriage to Margaret Peggy Brooke, a British stage actress, ended quickly under the strain of career ambition and his increasing dependence on alcohol. His second marriage to Dr. Gertrude Wilner, a refugee lawyer and teacher from Czechoslovakia, was stable but distant. Although they later adopted a son, Cuthbertson remained emotionally guarded, often burying himself in work rather than family life. Typecasting became both his blessing and his burden. His stern face and authoritative voice secured roles in Tunes of Glory, 1960, The Avengers, and dozens of British dramas, but they also locked him into a narrow image he couldn't escape. Behind the scenes, years of frustration fueled heavier drinking. As he entered his 50s, he began suffering from worsening cardiovascular disease. Chest pains, shortness of breath, and recurring arrhythmia shadowed his final decade, gradually forcing him off the stage he loved. Alan Cuthbertson died on February 8, 1988, at age 67 from heart complications. He spent his final years quietly in Surbiton, away from the spotlight that had once shaped his life. His estate, estimated at around $1 million, including his Chelsea property and an extensive collection of historical books, was partly dedicated to heart disease research, a final gesture that echoed the silent battle he had fought for years. Their stories may have ended, but their legacy still echoes through time. Which actor's fate shocked you the most? If you want to uncover more forgotten Hollywood histories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and continue this journey with us.